One small step for man.
Out for the. Hello everyone, welcome back to Here's What's Going On podcast with me, AJ, and today we're jumping into the ABC's AJ's Book Corner. We're reading The Women's War, Mother of All by James Glass, and this is the third book in the series of the Women's War series. I'm on the third one. I think this is the last one, actually. The windows were open to let in whatever fresh breezes they could, but the air in the royal apartments was nonetheless stifling. Having spent more than a year living in the desert, Ty had thought himself inured to heat, but the climate here in Alta seemed far more oppressive than that of Women's Well, where the air was bone dry, and even in the worst heat of summer, the nights were cool. Here in Alta, the nearby sea added such a heavy dose of humidity that the air felt thick as porridge. "Do sit down and eat," his wife Kaylee urged, and he reluctantly moved away from the window to join her at the table where a small supper had been laid for them. Kaylee's face glowed with perspiration, and the few locks of hair that had escaped her headdress were plastered wetly to her neck, but she seemed to accept the discomfort with her customary serenity, a serenity Ty envied as he tried futilely to push up the sleeves of his doublet. "How I loathe civilian clothes," he muttered. "Custom required." He set aside the comfortable shirts and trousers he'd worn in the military and donned the doublet and breeches of a gentleman with all the concomitant adornment, but he longed for the days when he could breathe inside his clothing. Kaylee smiled at him as she served herself a helping of stewed vegetables and ignored the beautifully roasted whole fish that took pride of place in the center of the table. Ty frowned. "Should have asked the cook to fillet it for you," he said, shaking his head at himself. Their marriage was in its infancy. He was still getting used to dealing with his wife's unique challenges in life. It would be no easy feat to avoid fish bones when one could not see them. Kaylee shrugged. "I'm used to making do, and I'm not overly hungry." "Well, you don't have to make do anymore," he said as he portioned out a serving of fish, inspecting it carefully for bones before sliding it onto her plate. "I think I got them all, but be cautious anyway." Her mouth quirked. Ty was still learning how to read her expressions. He never realized how much he'd relied on a person's eyes to give away what she was feeling, but he thought he saw mild reproach. "I've eaten fish before. I know to be careful, and I could have served myself if I'd actually wanted the fish." Ty winced and wished he were more at ease with his wife. It had been abundantly clear from the first moment that Kaylee was far more self-sufficient than most people gave her credit for, and that she found it irritating, if not downright hurtful, when people offered unwanted help. He vowed not to be one of those people, yet it was astonishingly easy to fall into that trap. "My apologies," he said, serving himself while wrestling with the guilt that was becoming his constant companion of late. In Women's Well, Kaylee had gained her freedom by marrying him, escaping the scrutiny of her father and stepmother in Rosenalom high society, and then he had abruptly snatched it back from her by accepting the regency and moving them to Alta, where her blindness would once again be treated as a source of shame. To make matters worse, he couldn't even be a proper husband to her, for his heart had remained in Women's Well with Shanlix and the child she carried. A pang of longing struck him, and he shoved it aside and tried to stay present with the woman he had married. Just because he could not love her didn't absolve him of his duties as a husband. Yeah, I like how these books pick up exactly where they left off. And I also like how the story has just been building and building and building and building. In the last one, spoiler alert, I'm so upset because I don't think Down the Mall is dead. Oh, no, Down the Mall isn't dead. At the end of the second book, you find out he's not dead, and I was so disappointed because I told my sibling about it, and I was like, oh, yeah, Down the Mall's finally dead, and then just find out at the end of that book that he's not dead, but he's very severely poisoned and has some issues with him, which I'm glad for because he needs to suffer. Anyway, this episode, we're discussing Family Systems and the Cognitive Effects by Martha Sweezy, PhD, and Sarah Bergenfield. They discuss the brain and how it's conditioned by the learned experience and developed defenses we learn from our familiar environments. I learned unhealthy things in my childhood, and, I think I'm trying to unlearn those things in my adulthood. And the article uses the example of exercising, how you don't get stronger off of one workout, you get stronger from continuously exercising, building that strength in the muscle. And you train your muscles and your brain to adapt to the exercises. And over time, you achieve more strength. The brain learns to prepare itself for specific outcomes based off of past experiences. The article talks about how a certain level of uncertainty is necessary for growth, or if we're using, exercise as an example to build muscle. However, constant uncertainty in the brain can lead to causing the brain to begin to adapt to viewing all experiences as uncertain and unsafe. I thought of this as basically your brain wants to remain in fight or flight and survival mode. If you know like what having hypervigilance is like, then you know how mentally taxing it is and how crippling it can be and draining it can be. In relation to my family system, living in an environment that makes you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells can have you forming unhealthy coping skills and negative patterns. I like the article and how it places accountability back on the person reading, or a person who's been affected negatively, to change and unlearn those learned patterns. And I think it's important for people like me to unlearn those patterns so we can be better people and to take that accountability as well. I'm happy and I'm grateful for getting a kite. I've only owned a kite maybe when I was 10 or 11. I think it was the last time. And it was just plastic or whatever, and it wasn't fun or anything. It was just a basic kite. And I just bought this butterfly kite, and hopefully I'll get to fly it soon, so I'm excited about that. The quote: if you could erase all the mistakes of your past, you would also erase the wisdom of your present. I think it's a difficult pill to swallow, to find some sense of joy in your life, but look back over your life at all the sad things that had to happen for you to reach the joyful place you're at. Because to remove those sad things is then to remove the parts of the journey to make it to the joyful parts. And it's just really sad, but true. But before I go, be sure to check out the show notes. Also check out my books on Amazon titled Poems to Cry to in the Dark and Love Letters Ever Sent to Myself, and leave a 5-star rating. Other than that, I don't have anything else. I'm glad you're still here, and I hope you have the day you deserve. Bye.
One giant leap